Good evening and welcome to our monthly All Hands. My name is Jim Lawrence, Board Chair. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm very pleased that you decided to share your time with us. We have two outstanding speakers. I think you'll really be entertained by what they have to share with us tonight. But first, I'd like to remind all of us just what is civilian oversight. Civilian oversight provides checks and balances for our sheriff's office. Currently, the only oversight citizens of San Mateo County can exercise over the sheriff's office is via the election of the sheriff every 4 years, with very little information about the inner workings of the office. Accusations of misconduct, bias, excessive use of force against deputies are often investigated by the sheriff's office and our personnel. Sometimes the district attorney gets involved, but very little. A civilian oversight board is a neutral, independent organization that can bring transparency and legitimacy to the investigations of misconduct. Oversight boards may also review practices and policy and suggest changes that may prove useful in safe and effective policing. So in summary, civilian oversight gives us a few very important things. One, again, checks and balances. Two, transparency. Three, accountability. Four, impartial and independence. Five, continuous improvement. And last but not least, protections of rights and interests of all the citizens of San Mateo County. So thank you for joining us, and I turn it back to our moderator.
Paul, thank you. You can introduce William.
Okay, thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. My name is Paul Bocanegra. I am a strong supporter of civilian oversight, and tonight I have the pleasure as well as the honor of introducing one of our spotlight guests, William Palmer II. He's a board member, Sheriff's Department Oversight Board appointee, and co-chair Legislation, Policy and Practices Subcommittee. In March of 2019, William Tariq Palmer was released from CSP Solano after serving 31 years. 23 years were ruled by the California Supreme Court as constitutional excessive punishment, torture. He immediately assumed the position as a leader by advocating for social reforms and mentoring youth both in community and college students at the University of San Francisco as part of the PACE program. Requests began to pour in for William to share his story of becoming a self-advocate for his freedom and opening the door for thousands of youth offenders, myself included. The American parole system is an endless trap and a moral outrage, a quote from the Washington Post. With major journals, law enforcement, and teen groups, William had his own challenges with reentry. His housing at GEO was like jail, and his parole officer arrested him for the appearance of violating his myriad of conditions. Feeling that he cheated his way out, William Palmer was appointed to the San Francisco Reentry Council on the Sentencing Commission. He decided in 2021 that it was time to bring to life his system-impacted organization, Life After Next, to create the flagship of reentry in San Francisco and the Bay Area. William has added to his portfolio an investment company, Studio 3, to the Third Power, to empower startups with micro-lending seed money and to purchase property to provide holistic reentry transitional housing. He's a member of Hip Hop for Change.org, the Adachi Project, United Playas, Marin Shakespeare's Returning Citizen Theater Troupe, and on the board of the Peace Resource Center, San Diego. After completing the Friedman Policy and/or Communications Fellowship, he worked on the Selby, California Assembly campaign. He's the editor of the East County North Star newspaper. He credits living in San Francisco and being appointed to the Reentry Council's Sentencing Commission and Sheriff Department Oversight Board for providing the opportunities to exercise his civic duties. Without further ado, I introduce William Palmer II. Thank you so much for your service, sir.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, citizens of San Mateo County. And Paul, I just want to say it never ceased to move me to discover somebody new that that I helped to be released from prison, especially as a youth offender. So my story started when I was very young. My father was a social justice warrior. He participated in a lot of movements back in the 60s to gain justice for our community. And so therefore I didn't get to see him very much. And he spent time in jail and was actually kicked out of California for his involvement in trying to change the system. So I grew up without my father, but with a loving mother and a loving community. And when I was about 9 years old, we moved to a place where I was just rich enough to be the poorest person in my community. And so my eyes got real big and I wanted to have what everybody else had, although we couldn't afford it. So little by little, I began to commit small crimes that led finally up to the crime of that I was convicted for, which was a botched robbery, but they charged me for kidnapping and for the intent to rob an off-duty Riverside police detective, which I got shot in the process, which served me well for trying to do what I was doing. I immediately took ownership and accountability for what I did. I didn't know that was the worst thing you could do when going through the system. Honesty is not the best policy. Staying silent and allowing your attorney to speak for you will give you a better chance of receiving some justice, if not all justice. And so I confessed right away, and they offered me 2 sentences: life without parole and life with parole. And reluctantly, I took life with the possibility of parole in 7 years. I was sent to a maximum security in juvenile hall, where I discovered I was literally a illiterate, dysfunctional person. I didn't really know how to read and write, and I don't know how I hid that from myself as well as others, but I immediately knew that it was time to educate myself because my family believed in education, and that education is freedom. And it took me from February to the end of August, beginning of September, to finally get an A on my spelling test. And the reward that came with it was a Butterfinger, which I coveted so much. So off I went to YA, which they call Youth Authority. Now it's called Juvenile Detention Centers that they closed down. I was able to help that on the back end. And so I thought it was good. YTS, Youth Training School, felt like I was in college, but we couldn't leave for spring break. You know, we were a gated community. And so I continued my education. I continued being an advocate. I was on the student council, which I worked with the administration and helped the general population, advocate for their needs. And we threw little parties and things of that nature. And that was the beginning of my my advocacy and social justice work. And I had no idea that was what it was. And so 2 years went by. The court asked YA to house me until I was coming of age to be sent to the adult prison. But at 19, I was still a small guy and very green. I thought prison was going to be like YA, and boy, was I wrong. When I got to the reception center, I immediately saw a level of violence, a level of hate, dysfunction. The guards were totally different. They were no longer called counselors. They were called correctional officers, COs, and life had switched on a dime. And I was blown away. I realized then, after I started working on myself, I was holding my breath the entire time, just hoping that I could survive for 7 to 8 years, as they promised me. If I did 7 to 8 years clean, I would be able to get out. So I was just holding my breath. But in the meantime, I studied everything I could get my hands on. I was a history buff. I love history. It woke me up. I read the autobiography of Malcolm X, which really enlightened me that the world was very different than the one I grew up in. And to make a long story short, I got my AA degree in business, emphasis in business. I became a leader in the community again, what they call the MAC rep, Men's Advisory Council. I was just naturally drawn to these positions and elected by my fellow prisoners. And over time, I began to realize that life as an advocate is not nice. No one likes you. the administration doesn't like you because you're always agitating for grievances, and the people who you work for think you're not doing enough and you're working on their side. And so it was always a balancing act. And fortunately, because I wasn't a gang member, they knew that I was fair, that I wasn't taking sides. I didn't have no dog in the fight, other than I just wanted the conditions of prison to be fair and just. And so after being a award winner, Defy Ventures pitch competition winner, I won $600 for my now business, Studio 3 to the Third, which is a investment business and art business and so on, whatever I can get going at the time. And as time went on, and I didn't work any job or assignment in prison that maintained the prison. My goal was always to work in the education department so that I can educate others. First, get your education so that you would know why you were in prison, how you got to prison, and how you were going to get yourself out. If you couldn't read or write, that was going to be a difficult task. And I had to eventually take my own advice. After the 10th time of being denied parole, I woke up, my mother and father had passed away. My siblings had went on with their lives and their children's lives. And I was no longer in family pictures for going on 25 years at this point. And I decided to help O'Melveny and Myers, which is a law firm in Embarcadero in San Francisco, to help me get out. And so I went to the law library and I began to study how I got there, what I was there on, and how I could get out. And I came up with a strategy that was under the jurisdiction of the Second District Appellate Court. And they took my case. It was outside of my jurisdiction normally. And I held my breath the whole time, hoping nobody would say anything and kick me out of that court. And to make a long story short, we won. We changed SB 260 and SB 261, gave youth offenders more of a meaningful chance at release. And I gained my liberation along with thousands of other people, such as Paul. And once I got out, I realized that I was an artist. I was a spoken word artist, a painter, so on and so forth. I did murals all in the prison. San Francisco was beautiful, but I knew right away that I couldn't afford to be a starving artist on parole, living in GO, a transitional house, and having my parole officer against me. And so I got a job, and that wasn't good enough. Eventually, I was in jail 3 times behind that parole officer. Another time where I reported a road rage against me, but because I was on parole, they put me in jail again. And actually said that if I paid the $1,000 restitution to the so-called victim, they would drop the charge. Since I was innocent and I knew better never to admit to something that you didn't do ever again in life, I held my ground. And after a year, the reporter that the article of the Washington Post that was read earlier interviewed the so-called victim, and he confessed to her, and she put it in the article that he actually did hit me and was the aggressor in the entire incident. And so once that got out, they dropped the charges, and I began to truly function as someone with civic duties. And as you can see, even on parole, it doesn't stop them from treating you as a second, third class citizen, even when you're doing your civic duties. And so I joined the group San Francisco Jail Justice Coalition, which exposed me to the wider San Francisco politics and advocacy work. I was on the Reentry Council, as he mentioned, and me and Sheriff Paul Miyamoto and the deputies began to have this relationship. At first, I thought it was going to be, an very contentious one, but Sheriff Miyamoto is a very good man, regardless of him being a sheriff. He's a good man. And so we found it very easy to get free phone calls in the jail, commissary for those who were indigent, and so on and so on, make these improvements. And since I have firsthand knowledge of the San Francisco jail, my viewpoints and perspective was valuable. Fast forward to the Sheriff Department Oversight Board, because I was doing so well in these other organizations, they nominated me to put my name in the hat to be appointed. And surprisingly, they did. I really didn't think I had a chance because of all the incidents with my parole officer, but they valued what I have been doing. And in between all this time, because of my parole agent and GEO feeling like a jail, this transitional housing feeling like a jail, I knew I had to start Life After Next in hopes of getting my own building and providing the services that especially youth offenders, after spending so much time in prison, needed special programming and special resources to address their unique needs in readjusting to society. And that was challenging because no one likes the new guy on the block. And so I felt like I was being blocked out a lot of times, but lately I've made a lot of progress. And actually now we are starting to look for a building in San Francisco to start our reentry housing program. And so once I got on the San Francisco board, Sheriff Department Oversight Board, I again realized that I was a unique voice. Everybody else were not formerly incarcerated. And like normal, like the story I've been sharing, I was looked to as a leader among the board members. I was this middle ground person, very calm, always trying to unite the board members to seeing things more similar than different. And that's where I believe I was introduced to Nancy and the crew to come on here and share my insight. And so why I joined was really because I wanted to see the sheriff department not only be criticized for the things they were doing wrong, but also congratulated for the things that they had done right. As I mentioned, being on the San Francisco Jail Justice Coalition, I saw inside the sheriff department on the things they were doing very well and not getting any credit for that. And again, wanting to support a good sheriff over someone who might be elected that could be very, very, very worse. And so as of now, I feel very good in our efforts to hire an inspector general to oversee the sheriff office. They are working with us, and I really think that we're going to find a good inspector general and improve the conditions. The conditions in San Francisco have already improved greatly compared to the past, but there are a lot more things that can be done. One is really changing the culture of the sheriff office and inside the jails. I've been through there lately, and there have been improvements. I think a lot based on COVID and what the adjustments they had to make for COVID, and found that there are better ways at housing people. But we have problems with homelessness, addiction, and petty theft that has not been addressed. And the sheriff departments are working with the district attorney to figure out how do we arrest these people and give them the resources they need not to continue along in that journey of committing crimes and being self-destructive. And so I feel real good about where we are. I had the privilege also as an artist working in the county jail #2 and painting this mural, this B mural that made headline news in the San Francisco Chronicle and on TV. So giving back is not just always saying, what are you doing wrong and pointing the finger. Giving back is also providing the necessary resources and techniques to heal the population that's being affected by the system, and instructing the system best practices, especially restorative justice practices that will, if the intention is to truly solve problems, these are some of the solutions by those who are impacted the most by the system. And so thank you again for having me on. And if there's any questions that I can answer, please feel free to ask them.
Thank you, William, for joining us tonight. My name is Trina Patton, and I am the Outreach Work Group Lead. And I will be going over some of the questions we have for you in the chat. So the first question is, it says, it seems clear that a single arrest can often start a chain reaction that pushes people into the prison system. Our prisons and probation system reinforce that cycle. Is there a role for civilian oversight or community involvement in general in helping to break that cycle?
Thank you for that question. And that is an amazing question. That is a very important question to ask. The parole, the Board of Parole Hearings that regulates who gets out when they have a life sentence, historically has broken the law. Henry Butler opened the door to discovering a 40-year scheme of keeping lifers in by not giving them a suitability hearing that found them suitable, so they can then start working on earning time to get out. The parole system backs them up because they are the linchpin and the least reformed agency, because they can send you back for anything. Fortunately, I won a court case that precludes them from sending me to prison, but they can put me in for 5, 10, 15-day flashes. And they utilize that abusively and arbitrarily. And I just had one just not too long ago. So if we don't attack that portion of the prison system, prison will always be fluctuating, and they can increase the number or decrease the number just by sheer will and arbitrary decisions. And so there is a huge place for community oversight, not just for the sheriff department, but for the parole board and for the parole department. I would love to join anyone who will be willing to take up that fight. Matter of fact, the Public Defender's Office has a freedom project that we are in a partnership right now to do just that. And we need a community board that sees to those coming out of our institutions, that members that are teachers, psychologists, doctors, ordinary people, firefighters, instead of law enforcement agency, regular day human beings, citizens, everyday workers, the working force, to be on those type of boards to say, we want to look at records, we want to know testimony, we want to know what's right and what's wrong, and be able to be fair with those who have served their time. Actually, people on parole have served their time and are on what was formerly a slave catching agency. After slavery, and even during slavery, they had a slave catcher agency, which transformed into parole. And the only difference between them today and then is they traded in their horses for cars.
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much. How have you gone about helping to change the culture in the Sheriff's Department, or how has the Sheriff's Department gone about trying to change their culture?
That, I will have to be honest, it's going to be slow. But as people are aging out and retiring from the Sheriff's Department, the culture is being changed with new policies and a new oversight. As I mentioned, the San Francisco Jail Justice Coalition, led by our Shiro, our everyday hero, Anne. I cannot pronounce her last name, so I'm not going to butcher it, but it's Ann S. She is amazing, and we have a great team of people from all over, and we have advocated for change, and the deputies are the new ones. This is all they know, and so they're coming in and functioning under this new system, and still the older ones are there, and they're seeing it's hard, I seen the older ones still doing old ways, and I remind them when I see them, we don't do that no more. That's the old way. So the culture will change as long as we keep up and maintain the pressure in creating restorative justice policies.
Thank you. So as you know, Fix in San Mateo is doing exactly this, trying to bring civilian oversight to San Mateo County with an inspector general. What are your biggest challenges for you as a member of the Sheriff's Oversight Board, which is apparently just getting started?
The biggest challenge is just hiring our inspector general. We want to make sure we get that right. We want to make sure that person is not only a restorative justice mindset, he is also going to support the sheriff's office in what they do right, and it's going to be very critical and seek justice for when they do something wrong. We want to make sure that no one is hurt in our society, in our community, by the sheriff department. Their job is not to kill people, harass people. Their job is to make sure that all citizens are protected and served. And oftentimes that's not the case. And so we're going to hold that line. We're going to hold that standard. And so far, I believe that's what we're going to do and are doing.
Okay, great, thank you. So how has civilian oversight in San Francisco affected the hiring process? Do you find that it's a deterrence for community members to seek employment in the sheriff's department, the fact that there is going to be oversight?
Another great question. Not that the last one wasn't, I was just on a roll, so I just popped right into it.
That's all right.
The last meeting that I was at, because I'm being reappointed, so I can't sit on the board until I'm reappointed officially. But the last meeting that I was at, I asked the sheriff, what are the criteria in hiring? Because you seem to find it hard to hire good people. And so we went over that. And I said, I think some of these requirements can be lessened or done away with, because it is denying people in our community that may have had a brush with the law at an early age from now serving their community. And we want to encourage people in the community to serve in the sheriff department. And I walk into underserved communities, predominantly African-American communities, and encourage them that this isn't the sheriff department of old, and it is a badge of honor. And I always remind them the word sheriff comes from the Arabic word sharif, which means honorable. So if you're an honorable person and you want to do the honorable thing, why not become a sheriff?
Okay, very good. And we have a couple little more personal questions, not too personal, but what an incredible story. Thank you so much for sharing. You sound like a uniter and a collaborator. That must be hard sometimes, given the injustice and pain inflicted on you in your life. How do you stay so peaceful and calm?
I do a lot of meditation.
Very good.
No,
Okay.
it's a good question. Again, I've been asked that a lot, and I don't know any different than I am. So when people ask me that question, I kind of like, I don't get it, but I get it. I went into prison a hard head. I was very hyper. I can't stand still. I'm always into something. I like to know what's going on. I like to delve into things I'm not supposed to. And it became a mature, a matter of maturation. Like by the time I hit 30, I saw myself starting to calm down. And when that happened, I did begin to do yoga. I meditate, and I practice a spiritual way of life that is of peace. And so I still found myself not being able to get out of prison after all of these changes. And the one thing that happened that I tested was the power of love. After my mother passed away, I fell into a deep depression. I didn't get out of my bunk. I didn't take a shower until I couldn't stand myself, and to eat. Those were the only three things, and use the restroom, of course. And I went to a group called Man Up, and they taught me the difference between using my emotional side and my rational side. I said, wow, nobody ever told me I had two different sides of thinking. And I was always acting in my emotional self because I'm a Leo, and I feel with my heart. I live in my heart. And so I learned to control that, or at least put it in balance and think through. I'm a chess player. So I said, let me start using logic and strategy in life. But the one thing that really tipped the scales was I dedicated myself to get out of my depression, that I was going to love myself enough to get out of prison. And I was going to love everybody else in prison so that I won't stay in prison fighting against them. And that meant for the correctional officers, the free staff, and my fellow prisoners. And so I woke up the next day, and everyone I saw, I said, good morning. And if I knew their name, I would address it. And the correctional officers as well. And there was one correctional officer that just didn't like me at all. And I said, good morning. And he said, good morning. And he said it with the tone that he meant it. And I said, wow. I mean, immediately. And so I was fighting before that. I was fighting for 6 years to get out of prison. Now it only took me 4. Once I loved myself, that love went straight to the courts. They ruled in my favor and they released the door. When I got out, I was fighting against that parole officer I mentioned, Marco Montano. And when I got out the last time he put me in, I said, my bad. I forgot how I got out, and I love you. And he looked at me. He said, what kind of game you playing this time? I said, it's not a game, I promise. And in a matter of months, he was fired. And I went on to live my best years on parole.
Fantastic. Fantastic. And so another question is, you have so much going on in your life, and there's so much to do to create equitable law enforcement and eliminate abuses. How do you prioritize your work?
That's another good question. Boy, you guys keep them coming. They're good. I knew early on in my prison sentence and term that I had a purpose in life. And once I found my purpose, all my hobbies and sports that I like to get into, that was my recreation time. That was my me time. But I dedicate my life to fulfilling my purpose. And when I've had it, when I'm stressed, when I feel that I'm not putting on my own mask to put it on the mask for someone else, I just stop. I don't answer your emails. I'm not answering your phone calls. I'm gonna lay on my couch and watch football or basketball. I'm going to meditate. I'm going to paint. I'm going to do whatever causes me peace and harmony in my life. And then I brush that off and I get right back to my purpose, which is to make sure that our society understands their past, reconciles the past, and start creating the solutions and implementing the solutions that makes us all proud to live in the United States of America.
So thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Palmer. I know that you have another engagement to go to, but we have very much enjoyed you being here. And we certainly look forward to following your work, and great success for you and the San Francisco board. So thank you very much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. And anytime you need me, I'll be there. And I won't double book next time. You have my full and undivided attention. And I will look at the recording so I can see what happens after I leave. And thank you again for having me. And I wish you guys all the best in your developing your board and finding your own internal IG.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Inspector General.
So
Have a
much.
great evening.
You too.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Peace.
That was wonderful. Thank you, Trina.
Yeah.
So I was going to introduce our partner Spotlight, Chris Rasmussen. He's the chair of the County Behavioral Health Commission, and they have a series of recommendations. They've shared them at a really good ACLU panel, and Chris shared them, and I said, can you share with us similarly? And they've shared them with the Board of Supervisors. And so without further ado, Chris, the chair of the Behavioral Health Commission, and he's also a retired police officer from Redwood City, and he's also currently working with Stanford on their public safety plan and so forth. Thank you, Chris.
Hello, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, let me start my slideshow here. Yeah, so thank you, Nancy. So yeah, I'm a retired police officer, 30 years. I started in El Dorado County. I worked in San Francisco for a few years, and 23 years I spent in Redwood City, California. I'm working at Stanford now with public safety. I'm a policy project manager, so I'm charged with policies and procedures for public safety and for accreditation for law enforcement standards. I'm also the chair of the president of NAMI San Mateo County. And so I've been there for a couple months now, and we're turning that around. So yeah, our recommendations to the Board of Supervisors. So 3 years now, I think this has been a very long endeavor, but about 3 years ago at one of our planning sessions, we decided that one of our goals for the year was to right side the need for law enforcement in mental health calls for service. And so this was prior to George Floyd, and this was prior to COVID. This was about maybe almost a year before all of that happened. So we were forward thinking in our plans to try and take mental health calls out of law enforcement hands. And my take in this was I wanted to get it off the plate of law enforcement, because I know I've been to those calls and I know we're not the best people, law enforcement, to handle those calls. And so I wanted to take that off of law enforcement's plate and to provide other services to people that are experiencing crises with the mental health system. So we have, we'll go, so you can see here 50% of people in San Mateo County Jail have some form of mental illness. There's a lot of collaborations between law enforcement and mental health providers. I mean, the big one you've all heard of, I'm sure, is Cahoots program up in Eugene, Oregon. They do a very good program. It's been there for many, many years. And now there is a ton of these types of programs all across the United States that are successful, and they're doing very well. I don't know why San Mateo County is behind, but we hopefully will get those services going quickly. So we started an ad hoc committee to focus on countywide services. You guys are probably all familiar with the pilot program, the CWRT, which is a partnership with 4 law enforcement agencies. It's a co-response model, which means that law enforcement rides with or responds with a police officer to crisis calls. It's a good model. It's okay model, but there's room for more. This isn't a one-stop shop kind of check the box thing. We have a lot of great services in our county. We have the PERT program, which is run by the Sheriff's Department, Psychiatric Emergency Response Team. We have the SMART van that is provided by AMR to take people in crisis, kind of in a lower key setting to the hospital without all the bells and whistles of an ambulance and fire response. So we have great services in the county. We just don't have something that is connected to the 911 system. And I think that's the biggest finding that we had when we delved into this. This was a big project. If you don't have the full recommendations, we can put the link in there for you somewhere. But our major findings were that we needed mental health services to be inserted into the 911 system. When I was working as a police officer, I went to a crisis call for service, and if I didn't have a number of some type of clinician or some type of resource on my phone or through dispatch, we weren't getting that, and we had to go find those resources. So entering into the 911 system means that if you need services, you're going to get them through the 911 system and not have fire or medics call clinicians or response team or something like that. The need to triage mental health calls for service early, the need for consistent countywide services for mental health crisis. I think that's very important, because right now the pilot project only covers 4 cities. And so if you happen to live in a different city and you're having a crisis, you're not going to get the same services as you are as if you're living in one of the cities with the pilot program. So we really stress the need for countywide services. Countywide standards with dealing with mental health crises. You have 4 cities with 4 different police departments, with 4 different police chiefs, with 4 different clinicians, with, so the standards are probably a little different from each city than they would be if there was a countywide system, a countywide protocols with handling mental health crises. And the need for a comprehensive integrated system that, it's no wrong door. I think part of the problem with some of the crisis response and even with mental health response is that you don't really know who to call. You dial a number and hopefully you get to the right place somewhere along all the transfers in your calls. So the need for a no wrong door type of system where one call, one shop stop, we have 988 now, which is good, but that's really not integrated into 911. It goes to Star Vista, which is a crisis service, which is good, but we still don't have those connections into the 911 system. All right, we went through a bunch of people interviews. This is how we processed our recommendations. We collected a lot of information. We talked with, engaged with a lot of different response teams and different people across the community. And so we'll jump into the recommendations. So recommendation number 1 was to add mental health to dispatcher protocols. Some of the problems when you go to, and we spoke with the Stanford Gardner Center that's going to do the reports for the pilot project. And we spoke with them before they got started. And, we made sure that they knew that a lot of the coding, a lot of the protocols that dispatch has not been up to standard as far as identifying mental health calls for service. A lot of the calls were listed as, disturbance or homeless or, person yelling, or it wasn't coded as a mental health response. So trying to find that information when you look back is kind of hard. So we recommended that they update their services. We also recommend that they add mental health to their protocols when answering 911 calls. If you want to call in and you have a fire, you call in 911 and you say, I have a fire, send the fire department. So we want them to add in there that, do you need mental health services as a kickoff to the conversation on 911. I think I covered all those. Recommendation number 2, we are recommending that we actually add a licensed clinician to the dispatch floor. Triaging calls for service early, I think, is a very good way to get the person in crisis what they need. And if we had a clinician that was there on the dispatch floor, they could actually take over the call, they can help with the call, they can route it to the right place. I think some of the statistics in here, and I'll get ahead of myself, but 80% of the calls to 911 for crisis services can be resolved without a response from law enforcement. And I think that's, a very good indicator of why we need these services. Recommendation number 3, standalone non-armed crisis services. We need a standalone non-armed 24/7 mobile health crisis services designed to independently serve the entire county, not connected to law enforcement, not connected to any other entity, standalone crisis service that is connected into the 911 system. And recommendation number 4 would be community-based crisis stabilization centers. The one thing we don't have at all is community-based crisis stabilization centers. This is the emergency room for crisis intervention. If you have a crisis, this is a walk-in center. This is someplace where you can go right off the street to get help. And we believe that we need those in this county. I think at the bottom here, 80% and upward are resolved at that level of just through 911. If we had a clinician on the floor, up to 80% of the calls can be resolved without need for law enforcement. And I think, we've been working hard with the Board of Supervisors. We've been working with BHRS. We've been working with, we have a proposal coming up soon. Our MHSA 3-year plan is coming up for review. Mental Health Service Act, that's the millionaire's tax in San Mateo County. If you make over so much money, portion of your salary goes to mental health services, and that's the Mental Health Services Act. So we're coming up on our 3-year plan for the next 3 years of where we want that money to go to. And I think there's a portion, I think it's over $500,000 that is actually going to go to crisis services. So Hopefully, we're going to vote on that. Actually, we're opening the 30-day public comment tomorrow at our commission meeting. And then by July, we should close that and approve that money for services, and then that'll go to the Board of Supervisors. There's also some other grants that are out there working, and hopefully we can be able to fund such a program. We're also looking at, if you don't know, Half Moon Bay has a really good program called the CARES team with El Centro, and they run crisis services just like I mentioned here, standalone, non-armed crisis services for the city of Half Moon Bay, and they're looking to expand more coastal areas. So we're working with them to see if it's feasible to have a countywide program and what kind of money it would take to do that. So I think that's the biggest thing, right? So those are our recommendations to the Board of Supervisors, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Chris, this is wonderful. I think we don't have time for questions now, but I think our main ask is probably your ask, which is we can ask the Board of Supervisors to adopt these questions.
The recommendation, yes.
Yeah, I mean, adopt these recommendations. Do you want to put your email in chat if people want to contact you offline? So I'm going to move us on to the ending. This was so valuable, Chris. This would make so much difference in our county. And also, just for people to know, we always have actions. Right now, FxSMC is in a wonderful place where we're working closely with the Board of Supervisors. They are committed to doing an ordinance by the end of the year. I shouldn't say committed, they expect to. We've been in communication, of course, with Sheriff Corpus, wanting to make sure that this will really be able to provide a way to partner with her team and help protect public safety. But what we're trying to do is get people to remind the Board of Supervisors that they haven't publicly reported back since November. So there's a lot going on and nobody knows what it is. So I'm going to put a link in the chat because we're trying to ask people to comment at the next Board of Supervisors, which is June 13th. It's very easy. All you have to do is log on to Zoom and either put your name in chat or sign up on that form I just posted, and we'll get hold of you and give you the Zoom link, or you can go in person. 9 a.m. Tuesday, June 13th. All you have to say is, thank you, Board of Supervisors, for voting for civilian oversight of the sheriff. We want to know how it's going. Please do a study session and let us know. So that's an easy ask. Here's the next, I'm going to give you 4 asks. The next action you can take, and this is really fun, sign up to come to Half Moon Bay on Wednesday, August 16th in the afternoon for drinks and a silent auction and appetizers, and just for a nice summer party. So there's an RSVP link there. We do need to know how many people are coming because we have to make sure there's enough food. So that is August 16th. And we would be remiss if we didn't tell people that you can always donate to us if they're not tax deductible because we're a 501c4. But if the kind of work that we're doing resonates with your own values and interests, then make a small donation, make a recurring donation, send us a check. There's an online link, or you can mail us a check.
And I should say also that we are all volunteers. Yeah, none of us are paid staff. We're all volunteers. And
like some of our funding, a couple of $1,000s goes to the interpretation and the required upgrade for Zoom to be able to do interpretation. Some of it's going to printing, some of it's going to, I should back up and say the interpreters aren't volunteers. They are reimbursed, but those of us who volunteer regularly are volunteers, but we need to pay for the stuff we do. We do have some legal costs and some insurance costs. And for those who want to hear more from Paul Bocanegro, Elsa mentioned this in chat, but he's speaking at the San Mateo County Democracy for America meeting tomorrow night at 7 o'clock by Zoom, and talking a little bit about why it's important not to try kids as adults, which is something that the Democratic Party and the Democracy for America and In Our Care and a number of other groups, ACLU, have all signed on to, and also the kind of work that the Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention is doing. So, and thank you, Jackie, for putting a link to our merchant shop so you can get the kind of t-shirt that Karina's wearing. And yes, and Jackie's
And
wearing,
Paul.
yay. Or you can have a book, like I'm not gonna hold mine up, but I have my little notebook that says FxSMC Mateo County, or if you could see it, computer covers. If you walk around with a laptop cover or a computer cover that says Fixin', people notice it. So on that note, if you do these 4 things, we'll be happy. And we wanted to just turn it over for a few minutes to RJ to wrap us up and ground us and send us home.
Good evening, everyone. And Chris, I know you're still on. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm here in Half Moon Bay, so I'm so happy that you're also working with the CARES program. They've done a great job here and has really helped our community feel safer. So appreciate your work. I know that William said that you will listen to this. I also want to thank you. And I want to acknowledge that storytelling lives in all of our cultures, that it was the way that we spread our word, that we continued the good work from ancestors through our youth. And we want to be good ancestors. So continue to share these stories, continue to do this hard work that we're in. And I just wanted to take a moment to extend gratitude to Chris and to William for coming and speaking with us. And the way that we do this is, one is to, wherever you are, whether you're sitting or standing, just enliven your fingers and reach toward the earth, giving thanks to that which comes from the earth, be it strawberries and worms and soil, be it the bunnies. And then if you can, raise your hand above you, giving thanks to that which is above, the moon, the hawks, the sun, clouds,
The rain.
the rain, good, a few others. And then stretch your arms out, and whether your mic is on or not, I want you to send energy out, healing energy out to those that you love, those in need. Just say their names out loud. Beverly, Velma, maybe family members. And then I want you to bring it into your core, into your heart, giving thanks for showing up, for committing to making this world a better place, honoring the self. And I want to thank you all. So thank you this evening. And until we see each other again, thank you very much.